How do you think overfishing is affecting our oceans?
So overfishing is depleting the mating supply and the breeding supply of our fish, and then they can't reproduce in the same numbers. And so we just decrease the amount of fish each time, and then that impacts the food chain in the whole ocean, as well as our own economic benefits from this, because there's just less and less fish there.
What do you think can be done to help the problem?
We need to manage our fishing. We need to look at the populations that we presently have in these areas and decide, okay, this is how much fishing we can do in this area despite the economic competition that there is for the type of fish, because otherwise it's going to be gone and we're just not going to have that fish anymore. So we've got to be smart about it. We've got to realize the biological cycles involved and not just, oh, here's this fish, why don't I catch it? So avoid using methods where we're just doing trawling and just gathering up everything in the path of the ship, and try and be more selective.
It is estimated that 90% of the big fish have disappeared from the world's oceans. How does that make you feel?
So I hate to see our oceans being sort of depleted of what makes them an amazing part of our world. 3/4 of our world is covered by these oceans, and as we destroy and damage that part of our environment, it's going to have a huge impact on the land, and then of course we who live on the land. So we've got to protect our oceans and the amazing creatures, our sharks, our dolphins, the apex organisms that are the top of the food chain.
Overfishing is not only affecting tuna fish, but also killing dolphins, sharks, turtles, whales, and etc. Is it all worth it?
So I think we need to look at our plan and think more long range. Obviously, it's not worth it because then there's not even going to be the fish for us to eat. Even though we're in competition with these other organisms, if we overfish, we aren't going to have it anymore. So we really need to look at balance. We need those main predators in the food chain to show that it's healthy. And so we got to just stop with the blatant just harvesting of these things and look at managing our resources and making sure we're taking care of things in an environmentally sound way.
What is your honest opinion of overfishing?
So I really think that it's an economically driven cycle where a fish is popular, so we go and want to catch as much as we can to make as much money as we can, only thinking in the short term. And we have got to be smarter about things. We've got to look at resources and say, hey, this is how many fish we have. We need to keep our population steady and stable and use the environmental knowledge that is available to manage these things and make it good for the fish as well as ourselves. And we can't just go around, well, what's the next fad going to be? What's the next great fish going to be that everybody wants to go and catch? So we've got to look at it, and we've got to be willing to change our lifestyle and say, okay, then I'm not going to support some of these industries. I'm going to maybe even speak out against them and say we've got to look at this in a better way than what we're doing right now.
We begin a special series of reports on oceans as part of NBC Universal's Green Week, with the number of fish becoming dangerously low and a prediction that the world's major fisheries could collapse by 2048. NBC Chief Environmental Affairs Correspondent Ann Thompson takes a look at new efforts to keep the fish population thriving in part one of our special series, Sea Change, Our Oceans, Our Planet, and Our Future.
Through the fog of a Florida morning, red snapper glisten on a dock in Destin. It is the Gulf of Mexico's signature fish and under threat. Not from hurricanes, not from disease, simply from overfishing.
We got to a point in the 90s where we had more boats than fish.
Commercial fisherman David Krebs remembers when the fishery collapsed, decimating its reproductive population. Today, the United Nations says 28% of the world's fish stocks are depleted or at risk for depletion, including mackerel icefish in Australia, southern bluefin tuna in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and Atlantic salmon in Scandinavia. The problem in the world's oceans is not just the growing global appetite for fish or even greed, but it's that today we can do a better job of catching fish than ever before. Sonar and GPS systems help the fishermen zero in on their catch. The situation's so dire, the federal government has stepped in, closing fishing grounds, limiting catches, and changing the fishing gear. When the scallop beds collapsed off the coast of New England in the early 90s, fisherman Paul Rosanina was suspicious of help from the government and scientists.
You know, you think that they're going to try to close us down, you know, save the rocks, save the sand, save everything. But, you know, working with them, I think, you know, it's been good.
Scallops are now the most valuable fishery in the U.S. Fishing days are limited. Rosanina fishes about 60 days instead of year-round out of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Marine scientist Michael Fogarty thinks these partnerships are part of the answer.
I do think there's reason for optimism that we've turned a corner in terms of controlling exploitation rates. There's a lot of work ahead.
Now the government is taking similar measures in the Gulf, imposing science-based catch limits. But the red snapper fishery is far from recovering.
That is not going to happen officially until 2032 based on what the scientists tell us.
Today, David Krebs runs fewer boats with fewer people. But catching fewer of the fish consumers love means higher prices. Is that a good haul?
It's awesome. You fish 24 hours. So they went out and something they couldn't have done 10 years ago.
A new way of fishing to sustain the ocean and its fishermen well into the future. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Destin, Florida.
There will be much more on the environment all this week on the networks of NBC Universal, on NBC Nightly News, and on our website, nightly.msnbc.com.
Maddie, what do you think about overfishing?
Sad,
Why do you think it's sad?
because the fish are dying, because people are catching them.
How do you think overfishing is affecting our oceans?
I think our oceans are being depleted at a very rapid rate, especially the sharks and the dolphins. I think we should rely on harvesting fish by farming, fish farms.
What do you think can be done to help the problem?
I think we need to create fish farms.
It is estimated that 90% of the big fish have disappeared from the world's oceans. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel terrible. Countries need to work together to have a moratorium on big fish fishing, and I think a lot of it, they're not on board with thinking that it's a problem.
Overfishing is not only affecting tuna fish, but also killing dolphins, sharks, turtles, whales, etc. Is it all worth it?
Absolutely not. I'm not a fish eater, so I don't have a real affinity to how wonderful fish taste. So I just think it's very sad.
What is your honest opinion of overfishing?
I think it can be solved if countries would work together.